So, Ian, long before you were the NFL Network's senior insider, you planned on going to law school. When did having a job in sports kind of first come on your radar?
Okay, so I did. I went to Columbia, and going to be a prosecuting attorney was probably something that I thought about uh, most of growing up. Right? I saw it in the movies. I read about a lot of trials. I thought it would be very cool. So I went to Columbia, and I studied history. I was a history major, mostly because I liked it, but also because that sort of a little bit pointed me in that direction. Um, and then I saw the Columbia Daily Spectator, which was Columbia's student newspaper, just kind of sitting there. And I started reading through it. I'm like, you know what? This would be fun to write. So I called them up or emailed them or whatever it was back in the day. Um, Gave me an article to write. I liked it. Wrote a bunch more. And, I would say like probably a year in. So probably by the end of my freshman year, writing for the Spectator, I had already kind of made inroads there. Was kind of on my way to becoming an associate sports editor. And I was like, all right, I think this is what I want to do. And it wasn't so much working in sports because, like, I loved sports and I still do. Um, but it wasn't like I just was dying to be in sports. It was really just I love to write. And I wanted to do something where I could write a lot. And since I like sports and I love to write, I figured that would be kind of a perfect match. Like, had I gotten a job, covering cops or something for like a metro paper, my guess is I probably would have done that. Which is why it's interesting. Like, so many people are like, is this your dream to work in sports? And I'm like, I love sports, so I do like it, but the writing and then eventually the reporting was kind of what drew me to this more than anything.
So we're going to talk a lot about these first couple of jobs you have, and I was able to pull up a few articles from the Journal News. And was that a full-time or part-time gig? How did that work out?
No, that was not a full time job. That was part of the
Okay.
deal. So when I graduated Columbia, or I was graduating, I applied to 311 newspapers. I got
Wow.
two job interviews. One was with the Hobbs News Sun in Hobbs, New Mexico, which I did not get. Did not get that job. It's 15,000 circulation paper. Michael Meyer, our sports editor at the Columbia Daily Spectator, got the job. I was associate sports editor. Um, and then I had a job interview with the Journal News, which was my hometown paper. I'm in Westchester, New York. That was the basically county paper. It was a big paper at the time. It was really good. Ian O'Connor was the lead columnist. Like, it was really good. Um, and so there were three full time high school writers. Um, and then there were 13 like part time writers. And basically, as a part time writer, you make $12 an hour. You can bill for no more than 25 hours a week. You didn't get benefits, and sat in the office taking. Coaches would call in the results. You took games over the phone and put it in wrote up a little roundup, or you put it in the agate, and then eventually you would get to go write stories, and that was my job for 2 years. I did that, and so I lived with my parents while all my friends were, getting investment banking jobs and making like $80,000 living in the city and having the greatest life ever. I was living with my parents making no money. Um, Eventually, I got to go cover more games and I got to cover a bunch of high school football games. But you'd go cover a game on a Friday night, you'd write your game story as quick as possible, then you'd take the games that are called in over the phone. Like, that was basically the job. So I did that for 2 years. Um, and basically, my deal with my parents was if I can't get a full time job in journalism at the end of 2 years, then I would go to law school. And so, like, I got a job offer for the Washington Times, to be a editor where they would also allow me to write. And I was like, I went down, I visited, did the whole thing, and I was really close to taking it. But I was kind of like, I don't want to be an editor. I want to be a writer. So I eventually turned them down. And then, had a conversation with my sports editor, Mark Leary, at the time, that ended up like changing the entire course of my life and helped me get to Mississippi.
I want to go back to the 311 job applications. So are you like hand mailing
Mhm.
clips? Was that the process and
Oh,
just
yeah.
cover letters to 311 papers?
hmm I did a clips packet. So when I was in, I think this was the first. Yeah, I think this was the first. So when I was a senior in college, I made up. No, that's not true. This was the second because I had done this previously to try to get an internship because when you're growing up in college, the best way, or maybe the only way to get a good job is to get an internship. So like there's a couple of writers I'd sort of followed across the country who were like at, you know, Harvard or whoever, wherever, Princeton, wherever they were, one from Emory, and they got internships to these great papers. And they basically got an internship and then were like covering a major beat like the next year. And I was always like, wow, that seems like a great career. So I applied for all these internships. I didn't get any of them because I didn't have experience the previous year, even though I didn't know I really, really wanted to be a reporter 100% the previous year. So I hadn't worked for a newspaper. So I was like frustrated by that system, which really just rewarded people with experience just because they happened to know they wanted to do journalism early. It was all very frustrating to me. So I didn't get a newspaper internship between my junior and senior, but I did intern at ESPN Classic, which was amazing. And experience was so cool. And I learned a lot about research and reporting. But I knew I didn't want to be in TV, which at that point to me meant do like TV documentaries. But I still didn't have newspaper experience. So I applied to 311 places. I made a clips packet in Kinko's. I spent probably $350 of my parents' money at Kinko's. And then I hand mailed every application. And, I still have a lot of those letters. And some are like, you're doing some good stuff. We'll keep you on file. Some are like I remember the Indianapolis Star was like, we only hire people from Metro dailies. So sorry. I was like,
Oh.
okay, great. And then so I did that. I got the job at the Journal News. And then every 6 months for the next 5 years, I did the same thing. So I mailed out clips packets of, top 5 articles or whatever it is. Or like if I did a good enterprise piece, add that with a couple game stories. And basically so I went Journal News to Mississippi to cover Mississippi State, to Alabama to cover University of Alabama. And until I left Alabama, I did that every 6 months. So there are like sports editors around the country who probably still have my clips now of just like kinkoed together. And yeah, it was a lot, but that was kind of what I thought you needed to do,
Yeah, I mean, today you might not mail those, but it's the same idea that people, if you want the job, you gotta show the effort, show that you want to do it. Let's go to September 4th, 2002. Headline in the Journal News: Newman doesn't hide from pool anymore. And here's your lead. When Steve Newman was 8 years old, he would sneak away from practice at Badger Swim Club to hide in the bathroom. When head coach John Collins would come looking, Newman was nowhere to be found. These days, 32 years later, Newman can be found at the top of the medal stand. Pretty good lead for the beginning of your career. Well, that was one of the first stories I found.
Pretty good.
And yeah, first of all, what do you think hearing that?
I mean, that sounds like a pretty good snappy lead. My guess would be like a, probably 20-inch, some sort of community feature type deal. I mean, that was the kind of stuff you started out writing.
Yeah.
Couple interviews, and like those were also stressful because you didn't get many opportunities to write. But I feel like that sounds pretty good.
Well, let's go the next week. Here's the first football one I found.
Okay.
Raiders win in final seconds, the headline. On a sweltering 95-degree day, and with Scarsdale starting running back Noah Simons slumped on the sidelines with cramps, Raiders quarterback and kicker Chris Sazlu teamed with receiver Ted Detmer to pull out a 10-7 victory over Hen Hud yesterday in a non-league game. I mean, you had the lead written down.
Well, so two things about that. One, Chris Sazlu ended up becoming one of my brother's best friends in college.
Okay.
So that article happens to come up frequently, which is pretty funny. So in those days, you basically got like 10 to 12 inches to write.
Yeah.
And that one, if it was a sweltering day, it means it was probably in the middle of the day, but maybe not. It means I would have to go I would get to go back to the office and write it because you didn't even have laptops at that point. Like somebody had laptops, but I wasn't able to get one because I was still part-time. So you go back to the office, you write as quickly as possible. All the leads were like quick like that because you only got like 12 inches, which is like, 300 words. The night games were crazier though. because again, you didn't have laptops. So what you would do is you'd go cover this high school football game, and usually there wouldn't be a press box, or if there was, it would be just a stone slab with like the PA announcer. And so you'd stand the sidelines, you'd take stats on your little pad, and then when the game was over, because it was so late, you didn't have time to drive back to the office. So you'd literally dictate a game story over the phone to another part timer in the office who would then write it down, which is like very daunting because you'd be like, well, I don't know what I'm gonna write, and they'd be like, you got to start talking. Like there's no time. Like it's deadlines at 10, it's 9:46, and the game just ended, and you have your stats totaled up. You have a couple quotes, and that's what you have. And you would have to literally dictate the game from your head over the phone, and that's what would be in the paper the next day. And do it enough, and you get really good at coming up with things like right off the top of your head as if they are written stories. And those are like some of the best, toughest experiences, where it's like now you're like, oh, I have to write a tough game story, but like you're sitting in like an air conditioned press box and you have plenty of coffee and you have like a great computer. It's like wasn't like that back then. And so those were like really good training experiences.
Well, so in October 2002 alone, and this was maybe just like a week worth of stories, I had you doing boys soccer in North Salem, football in Tarrytown, football in Bedford Hills, football in Spring Valley, tennis in Greenberg, football in Dobbs Ferry, girls soccer in Thiels. Did I say that right? And that's a lot, especially for a part-time employee, not making a whole lot of money.
Right.
I mean, were you enjoying that? Did you have
Um,
moments did you have moments where you're like, is this really what I have to do? I mean, that's a
no.
lot, but you liked it?
I mean, that was my second month on the job, third month on the job, and that was kind of like I had nothing else to do. I had no friends around. Again, living with my parents. It's not like I was going out partying at night. All I did was work, and so I probably worked. That first year probably like 60 or 70 hours a week, but you're only allowed to bill for 25. Um, and then the next year I was all by the spring I became the high school baseball beat writer, which basically what that means is not only do you get to cover, three or four of the best high school baseball games a week, you go out on Saturday, you cover a great game, whatever it is, you're also in charge of basically the database. So you're in charge of if you want it to be right, and I always want it to be right, you have to make sure everyone calls in their scores with the right stats. So I spent hours chasing down scores, calling coaches, making sure stuff was right. So it was probably like 60 or 70 hours a week by the end of the first year into the second year. It was nonstop work, but like I was lucky, I was really lucky because I was able to live with my parents, even though I didn't like it. Um, it's a amazing lift because I was comfortable enough making no money because I had a place to live, and so I could like just work hard and not worry about anything else and kind of see where it took me.
You mentioned that conversation with the sports editor that kind of changed things. What was that, and what did it kind of result in?
So I'd gotten passed over for a full time job at the Journal News, um, and I was, I don't cry very often, but I was bawling like it was awful, and because I was basically at the end of 2 years, it was probably like May at the end of my second year, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to go to law school, which like by that point I kind of didn't want to do because I liked writing, I liked journalism, I liked the act, I liked the whole thing. So I asked for a meeting, and I sat down with Mark Leary, the sports editor who has since passed away from cancer, unfortunately. And I was like, and at that point they'd sent me on some really good assignments. Like I had a couple A1 features. Um, I had covered the high school football state finals, like really good assignment as a high school writer. Um, Ray Rice's team, by the way, New Rochelle. Um, anyway, and so I sat down with the sports center. I said, I think I'm good. I'm not going anywhere here. I've been passed over for a promotion, which means I'm not getting one. I think I want to do this and I'm willing to move. Can you help me? And he was like, well, and this was a Gannett paper. And he was like, well, there is a job opening at the Jackson Clarion Ledger in Mississippi. You'd have to move to Mississippi. You'd have to live in Starkville, which is a college town, which is why they were having trouble filling the job. because nobody wanted to live in Starkville. And I was like, I would do that. Like, he's like, well, you don't know anyone in Mississippi. I'm like, I don't care. So he had, as his intern at USA Today, he had a guy named Rusty Hampton, who was the sports editor of the Jackson Clarion Ledger. So, like, 20 years before, but at least someone he was sort of familiar with. So Mark Leary called down to Rusty Hampton, says, I think I got a guy for you. Read some of my clips, flew me down, toured Mississippi State, had the whole conversation, went to his house in Jackson. And I'll never forget sitting in the sports editor's living room and him being like, why in the world would a guy who went to Columbia, lives in New York, want to come down to Mississippi, live in Starkville, and cover Mississippi State? And I was like, I don't know why you would want to hire a part-time high school writer who's never had a full-time job and doesn't know the SEC to come down and do this job. And he was like, all right. I'm like, I think we could do this. And so he hired me, drove down to Mississippi in my red Ford Mustang convertible, said goodbye to my parents who were crying, and moved to Starkville with no friends, no plan, a job, no idea about the SEC at all. And I just started working, and it was amazing.
Well, when you do the newsbreakers.com Ian Rapoport search, you kind of go from the Journal News to suddenly you're in Oxford, Mississippi, covering SEC tennis. The culture shock of everything, I imagine there's kind of twofold, because one, again, you're living in this totally different place alone, but you're also covering the SEC. How did you kind of manage
Yeah.
those at that point in your career?
So first of all, I knew nothing about the SEC. Like, I was always a college football fan, sort of tangentially, but I was always playing sports growing up. And like, even in college, like, I was a lightweight rower at Columbia. So like, I was always busy on Saturdays. So I followed college football, but not as much as a lot of people. So like, I could not have named all the SEC schools by the time I got down there. But I like hyper focused on Mississippi State because they were starting training camp. They had an amazing story. Sylvester Cruden, first black coach in SEC history. Um, and he was incredible, still is incredible. We're still in touch to this day. And I just started reporting and started learning. And, crashed around a lot, made a ton of mistakes, made a fool of myself several times for being a Yankee in Mississippi. But also, it was a small town. Um, I made a deal with my father that I would go out and do one thing every day. Like, I was by myself when I wasn't working, I had nothing to do. So I would go out and do one thing, like hit golf balls or go to the grocery store. Like, when you're by yourself and you don't know anyone, like, you can get lonely. So I went out and did one thing. And sometimes that was like go to the bar and you sit and have a beer and you just sit there and maybe you meet people, maybe you don't. And it's such a small town. People are so nice. Like, yes, I was a Yankee, but like, it was a great experience. The culture was great. Um, and like, people knew what I did because it's, they follow Mississippi State like it's the most important thing in their world because it is. Um, but I ended up making some friends and met my wife there. Um, and, a lot of it was around football, but it was just like a great 2 years. I ended up on that coaching staff, um, had a ton of young up and coming coaches who I ended up staying in touch with. Shane Beamer, who I'm still in touch with, who's coach of South Carolina. Freddie Kitchens, obviously former Browns coach, and Joe Judge was a special teamer, and then I think a grad assistant the second year I was there. Woody McCorvey, who's at Clemson. Ellis Johnson was a great defensive coordinator. It was Amos Jones, who's a special teams coach in the NFL for a long time. I mean, it was a lot of coaches that I became friendly with just on that staff alone. And it was really a great experience that started off with me knowing nothing and knowing no one and just kind of figuring it out.
That is great advice by your dad, by the way. That is really that because it's not the most daunting thing to do, but it makes total sense, especially when you're in a new place to just do that one thing.
Yeah, and like
Yeah,
when people ask for advice, I always say, there's a couple things I'll always say, but one of them is be willing to go somewhere weird and figure it out. Because the lessons you learn when you have no friends and barely know your job and have to do it are incredible.
and you are our second guest on this podcast who's got their start at the Clarion Ledger, Courtney Cronin, as well, a few years after you. That
Did
was
she?
her.
You know
That was
that.
her first job.
Who
Yeah,
is she covering?
she was covering high school sports in the area. in
Did not
Jackson.
know that. I'm
So
surprised I
that
didn't.
was her.
Usually I know all the Clarion Ledger people. I did not. I mean, obviously I know Courtney now, but I did not know
Yeah,
that. Cool.
that was her first full time job. So I always ask guests in the show, Ian, for their welcome to the big leagues moment. We always ask rookie players for it. We might get to yours. Maybe yours was in Birmingham. Maybe it was the Clarion Ledger. But do you like if you had to think of like the moment you're like, oh, this is what I'm doing is real. It's
Oh yeah.
important, negative or positive. What comes to mind?
So I had plenty of moments along the way. Um, there was a couple in Mississippi where I'm like, sort of embarrassed myself for being a Yankee. A couple of those, but probably the one that stands out the most was I was covering Alabama, and that was a great job. Birmingham News, the statewide paper, biggest paper in Alabama, covering the biggest beat. I was 26. And I remember like I applied knowing there was zero chance I was getting it because all the best writers in the South applied and it was the most coveted job. And somehow I got it. And it was a good job. Mike Shula was the coach. Team was okay, but it was a lot of interest. And then he got fired. And it was a 38-day coaching search. But midway through that, I broke the biggest story that I had ever broken, which was that Rich Rodriguez and Alabama agreed to terms for him to be their next head coach. And it was a great moment. Like I had it nailed down by the highest of sources. I talked to Rich Rod's agent at the time, who has fortunately since passed away. And he was like, look, he's like, I can't tell you what to do, but you got it. I was like, okay. And it was an amazing moment. And I sent him my story. I waited like 7 minutes for it to be posted online because there was no Twitter, right? And I wrote my story for the paper. It was scrolling on the bottom of Sports Center, Birmingham News, Rich Rodriguez to be coach at Alabama. And I went out and had a drink with a couple of my buddies who were covering Alabama for different papers. But, even though I got the win, like we were all happy because it was over. It was a miserable search because everything at Alabama is unbelievably hyper focused on Alabama. So every little morsel was so intense. And the beat writer who covered West Virginia, who had been there for like 20 years, was waiting on Rich Rodriguez's steps when he got home from Tuscaloosa. And the Alabama let him leave. They let him go home and tell his team, which was a huge mistake. And so the beat writer asked Rich Rodriguez, like, hey, there's a report out of Birmingham that you're taking the Alabama job. And he said, I'll see you in the morning. And I was like, that's weird, but okay. Turns out that West Virginia officials had met Rich Rodriguez on the tarmac. It offered him $800,000 raise and massive facilities improvements. And by the time he got to the next day to tell his team goodbye, which was covered live on ESPN, like the team meeting, like the backs of the players were covered live on ESPN. So at that point, like no one had confirmed that Alabama had received word that he was still taking it. So they showed cheers from the West Virginia players. And I was like, oh God, this is bad. And I knew that he had flipped. And it went from the biggest story I'd ever broken to the biggest mistake I'd ever made. Even though it wasn't a mistake, it was all true. Everyone had confirmed it, but it didn't matter. Like nobody cared that the whole world had confirmed it and he actually had agreed and then flipped and whatever. It was the worst moment of my life. I didn't leave my house for 4 days. I got death threats from fans. Paul Feinbaum was absolutely murdering me on air constantly. My sports editor went on his radio show to defend the reporting because it was as locked down as you could ever imagine. But it went the other way, and if I could do something different, like to be nothing I would do. The story was 100% true. It just, his life changed when he got back from West Virginia and he stayed. But it was awful. And 4 days later when I could finally leave my house, like it slowly started to get better. And then, eventually they hired Nick Saban, which, I don't know. I don't remember if I broke that, but I was definitely on the forefront of it. I was definitely among the people who broke it. I don't quite remember how it happened, but I was definitely among the leaders who broke it. So I'm like, all right, now they got Saban, everything will be fine. And of course it was fine. But the amount of reaction I got from that one story is something I will never forget. And I was like, this is real. And every story at Alabama for the next 2 years was like the biggest story in the world. It was intense.
I do have from January 4th, 2007, and Ian, to bring you back to those days, it was kind
Remember
of
this
funny
one?
to read every day. It was like I'm going through the Birmingham news, like every day was something different. Saban's out, Saban's in, Saban's back,
So
and
January 4th, are you going to read where, if I remember the date correctly, is this going to be, I guess I'm going to have to say it, I'm not going to be the coach at Alabama? Is that date?
that was a day before, I
Okay.
think. This is when he
Because
gets the job. So
because
this
I
is
remember
yeah.
because I
I read
remember
that one too.
I remember he said that, and my story the next day was Alabama officials have been told a different story from Saban. They have been told keep waiting or something like that. But anyway, all right, read the
Yeah.
story.
Well, no. So yes, no. I did see that one. This one that had the big headline is Saban rolls in, and you guys have two stories. Yours is Coach touches down in T-Town, and I'll read the lead here. 38 days later, after several twists and turns and false starts and a much publicized football coaching search, University of Alabama Athletics Director Mal Moore wound up with his first choice. Amid plenty of local and national doubters, and for more money than any other college coach in America receives, the Crimson Tide on Wednesday hired Nick Saban as its 27th head coach. And I've read before, and you've talked about how much covering Saban kind of changed, like just sent you on like just a different trajectory. I got to imagine just that. I mean, you told that Rich Rod story, which is just incredible and wild, but just the whole save. I mean, this whole thing. I mean, it is kind of in a sense what you do for a living now. I mean, you have to be constantly chasing things and constantly tracking this stuff. And how much did the Saban thing kind of impact if you look back at it now, like where you are today? How much goes back to like that
Oh,
those moments with Saban?
I'm sure I would not be in this job if Alabama had not hired Nick Saban. I'm sure of it. But so that day was crazy because so we sent an intern to Tuscaloosa Airport to sit there for 3 days in case Saban's plane came in. We sent him pizzas, we sent him Coke, like the drink, and all that stuff. And it was amazing. And then finally the plane shows up, which everyone was plane tracking these days. So the plane shows up and thousands of fans showed up at Tuscaloosa Airport, thousands upon thousands. And it was a scene like I've never seen. You had some Miami reporters who were still mad, like Jeff Darlington, who was working for, was covering the Dolphins at that time, was screaming questions at Saban about why he lied. And it was a crazy scene. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is what it's like. This is what it's going to be like. And every press conference was aired live on TV and on the internet, which was the first time that had happened. So I'd sit in the middle front row and I'd ask all the questions that Saban wouldn't want to hear because that was kind of my role. Like I was the brash young kid. I was the Metro daily beat writer for the biggest paper. Like that was kind of my job. Um, and fans hated it. I called him Nick because that was his name, but everyone else called him Coach. Um, and it was every single thing I did was scrutinized on the internet. Every single story I broke. Um, it was crazy. And recruits, there was constant stories about recruits. Like I have so many memories of being at basketball games or baseball games because if you cover Alabama football, you're in town. You also cover the basketball team, however far they go, and you cover the baseball game, the baseball team if they go to a regional and all that. It's very fun. Um, and I remember sitting at those games writing Alabama recruiting stories, football recruiting stories, because that was the most important thing. And so, like, when I got the job at the Boston Herald to cover the Patriots, my whole pitch was like they said, you have to have 5 years of NFL experience to take the job, to get the job. And I had zero NFL experience, but I did cover Nick Saban. So I wrote this long letter to the sports editors to be like, here's how I covered Nick Saban. Here's how I would cover Bill Belichick. And that ended up getting me the job. And so if Saban wasn't in Alabama, there's zero chance I would have been hired by the Boston Herald.
Wow. As we start to wrap things in, with what you do now, I mean, you are everywhere. It's part of your job. I've joked with you about this before that sometimes you will indirectly ruin my day. If you have news and
Mine
those of
too.
us in the beat, and we have to confirm it, and then we got to write about it, and suddenly you're working, but you're on TV every day. You're breaking news. You have this massive audience, and you get because of that, you get critiqued not only from fans, but you get critiqued by other people and who do what you do. You get critiqued by
Plenty,
sports media has its own entity
plenty.
that critiques you. Uh, Building the thick skin to handle that was, I assume that the Saban, kind of describing that. I mean, is that kind of where you think you kind of got that, you were able to build up that kind of tough front to, again, you couldn't have imagined what it's like to have this today, but like, is that where that kind of started?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I got such negativity. Covered Mississippi State too, because like Mississippi State isn't as big a deal nationally, but locally it is as big or bigger than Alabama because it's everything. And so every single thing I wrote was critiqued on message boards. Message boards were big back then. That's where it all happened. So it was message boards and sports radio. And I was a New Yorker, a 24-year-old, a 26-year-old New Yorker coming in covering their Southern teams that they loved. Like, it was a lot. Like, not everybody loved me. And I got a lot of criticism. Now, by the end, it all worked out. And I think the fans kind of realized that I liked this and it was a good thing all around. But at the beginning, it was not. Um, and so you read all the hate, see all the bad stuff, and you read it enough, and you're kind of like, that doesn't really matter. And so now, like, I don't know that I have thick skin because thick skin would mean like I see it and read it and like are able to
Yeah.
brush it off. It's not even that. I don't care about it. First of all, the online comments, Instagram, Twitter, I don't read them. Life is better when you don't read them. There's nothing I could gain, unless it's like you made a spelling mistake in a tweet, which like someone will text me anyway. Like, there's nothing to be gained from reading the comments. And so Mike Garafolo will tell you like the biggest impact I've ever made on his life was don't read the comments. And so I don't, because all those people who'd say all those things in the comments are the same people who'd come up to you and be like, "Oh, I'm a big fan. Great to meet you." So I don't read
Eh,
any of them. And like for the criticism of like, there's plenty from other reporters, either you get like subtweeted from some other reporter or the sports media industry, the people who critique us, like awful announcing, like I read some of it and I enjoy it when it's about other people. But when it's about me, like I just don't care, and it doesn't affect me one way or the other. Which is like a great skill that I've learned, and it really keeps me sane in this like insane job.
and I think it's great advice too that what you accomplished at the Birmingham News was more important to the Boston Herald than whatever fans might have been saying, because the people who are in charge, the decision makers, understand what it is that you're trying to do. All right, Ian, on this podcast, we always talk about, it's called breaking in. We talk about how you broke into this, which is what we've done. But I do want to take a quick detour in a sense. And like, how would you describe breaking in to breaking news at the way that you, because it is what you
Um,
kind of,
yeah,
like,
it
because it's a
was.
little different.
Yeah, it's a little different, but it's a really long road.
Yeah.
So I got hired at NFL Network to be our Dallas correspondent, with the thought that eventually I would be our insider. And so, quick story. I had been 9 months into covering the Cowboys in Dallas, and I got a call from one of our editors who was like, "We'd like you to be in LA for Black Monday, which is the day after the season. We don't call it that anymore, but that's what it used to be called. And we as a network have not broken a coach firing, a coach move in like 3 years. We'd like you to break one." And I was like, "Okay." Um, and so I dedicated myself to this for like a month and a half, and I broke Lovey Smith getting fired,
Mhm.
which I think it was 10-6. It was a big surprise, and it was weird because it was such a great moment, but it was also like someone getting fired, which was terrible. And I knew him, I knew his family. The whole thing sucked, but like that was a good welcome to my job because like you break a big story and it's like this guy tore his ACL, and you're like, "Am I happy about this?" Like, not really, but I'm happier than I broke it than if someone else broke it. So, um, and I was like, they're like, "We'd like you to be our insider. You can like that showed I could do it. We'd like you to be our insider." I'm like, "All right, what the heck do I do now?" And so for 2 years, I was on the road for Thursday Night Football, Wednesday to Friday, walking every sideline, meeting people, introducing myself to coaches and GMs and coordinators and some players and agents who happened to be there. And, I was in I was on the road Wednesday to Friday, and then I was in LA Saturday, Sunday for game day morning. And so I had 2 young kids who I basically didn't see for 2 years, until after the season. And it was a lot. And so after 2 years, I was like, all right, gotten a lot of numbers, I met a lot of people. Like, now it's time to start like really breaking some news. Except it probably took another 3 years or maybe even 4 years to really get people to trust you enough to tell you the news before it happened. And so I would say it was like probably like realistically a 6 year stretch of meeting everyone and working the relationships and getting an opportunity to even think about breaking news. And then probably another 2 years after that to really be like at the forefront. It's a lot. And so, like, you'll see people along the way try to really shortcut it. And you can have success in different ways, but like the shortcut does not work because it's all about relationships and like it's not going to be perfect. And you really have to rely on the relationships that you built when things don't go great. And so that was a good process. It just took a very, very long time to get here.
The advice you talked earlier about, the advice you give to somebody is be willing to go somewhere different and try something new. I'm sure you get this a lot of people who want to break into the industry. I'm sure there are probably people with dreams of wanting to be the next Rap Sheet and be on NFL Network. And you just explained how long it takes and all the work it takes to get there. But anybody who's just trying to break into sports journalism, what's kind of some of your other ultimate go-tos that you tell them?
All right, two more things. One, you heard be willing to move. The other is make sure you like the writing and reporting more than sports. Like people sort of romanticize working in sports, quote unquote. And I always try to caution, like, if you love sports, if you really truly love watching your football team or watching your baseball game or whatever it is, get a job where you make a lot of money, get box seats, and watch your team up close. It's awesome. You can have beers. The food is great at stadiums now. Like, that is an awesome life. If you like the act of writing and reporting, or whatever it is, whether it's, if you do a vlog, a TikTok account, like whatever your method of delivery is, communication method, like that more than sports. Because like I cover sports, but that doesn't mean I'm like sitting around watching games all the time. Like I do watch all the games, but that's like a 5% part of my job. When I'm like talking to a GM about a trade that may happen, like that's not sports, that's just reporting. So like the reporting more than sports. The other thing is if you like your job, and like I think we all do, right? I mean, I certainly do. If you're a young person and you like your job, don't be shy about it. Tell everyone, because editors and bosses want to hire people who like their job. And so I always enjoyed what I did. I still do. And I tell everyone about it because it's a great way to get a job because they know that even if you have to work hard, you're going to like it. And if you like it, you'll do it better. So anyway, that's my advice.
All right, NFL Network senior insider Ian Rapoport. I don't need to tell you to follow him on Twitter and Instagram at RapSheet. But Ian, I mentioned this in the intro, which you did not hear. But my first week in my first job, you were the one I was texting, as you were my Patriots correspondent at Pro Football Weekly. So you're one of the first people I met in this business. You were incredibly helpful to me as I got started. I was reading you every single day, and it's fun to see where you're at now. And this was really cool to get to hear your origin story. So thanks so much for joining the podcast.
No, thanks for having me, and it was fun to look back on a lot of that stuff for sure.